that, let's move into our main topic, Rob. So you had the suggestion that as something different, we would do a deep dive into one particular story. And I said I was very interested in doing that. And I had the stipulation that I think you agreed with very, very quickly and supportively, that it had to be a story that wasn't one that's talked about a lot. It should be one of those classics we all talk about. It shouldn't be one of those less than well-respected or well-regarded stories that we all talk about. Something that's maybe a little bit off the wall. And The Keeper of Traken appealed to both of us as being one of those stories that I think is kind of lost a little bit in this great 7-season epic that is the Tom Baker years. So we decided to talk about that.
It also gave me a chance to crack open my new Blu-ray set.
That's true as well. And it's interesting to note, our friends over at the Diddly Dum podcast, a couple of episodes did a special on the Tom Baker era where they asked their audience to vote for their top 5 favourite Tom Baker stories. And The Keeper of Traken got no votes.
None.
Now, I suspect that's because whilst it's not in anybody's top 5... it's probably in a lot of people's top 10 or top 15. But it's not one of those instant top 5 Tom classics that you reach for. It's a little bit... forgotten's too strong a word, but a little bit forgotten.
Is it because of what else is going on in that season and that it's the penultimate episode before Legopolis? Is it just its position in the Tom Baker pantheon?
Yeah, I think that's part of it as well. I think it's also not part of the Hinchcliffe era, which, if somebody says to you, what are your top 5 Toms? I think for a lot of people, the first place you go is the Hinchcliffe era.
Yes. Oh, without doubt.
And for others, they'll say, oh, I'm also a big fan of the Williams era, and they'll go grab City of Death or whatever it might be out of that. But a lot of people, I guess, sort of forget that there's this wonderful adjunct to the Tom Baker era, which is season 18, one of my top 3 classic seasons. I love this season. And it does sort of sit in there, and it's not the Leisure Hive, which is the big new, wow, Doctor Who's changed, and it's not Legopolis, it's not part of the East Base trilogy, and Lalla Ward's not in it, and yeah, it gets forgotten. So before we dive in too far, Rob, I'm going to ask you, what are your memories of this story?
Dave, I would have seen this around the mid-80s, probably around age 10 or 11 or something like that, and I initially, and I have felt this way about other Doctor Who shows I've come to really love over time, I was a little bored by it. I didn't quite... well, I understood what was going on, but I didn't quite get why it was interesting, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And I also thought the Master didn't look as good as the last time I'd seen him in Deadly Assassin. And so I kind of wrote it off as being a bit, But I've subsequently changed my mind about it. I do quite like it these days, but I'll cut off there and ask you the same question.
So I've gone back and actually looked up some dates. And I would have first seen this in May of 1984. Now, I don't remember it, but do you remember, Rob, back when season 21 went out in Australia for the first time?
Yes.
And they got to the end of the Planet of Fire, and the censors still hadn't released Caves of Androzani for viewing. They still were, how the hell do we show this at 6 o'clock? Like, what? So the ABC just said, anyway, look, we don't have anything more for you. We're going back to the Leisure Hive and going to show you season 18 again. And I remember that season going out. I don't really remember the Keeper of Traken from that, but I would have seen it. But my real memories come from May of 1988, when the ABC repeated most of the Tom Baker era on Saturday afternoons. Now, I got this in Melbourne as 2 episodes, so parts 1 and 2 were broadcast in an omnibus format one week, and then the next week parts 3 and 4 as an omnibus, so I didn't know the cliffhangers of parts 1 and 3 for many, many years. Rob, in Sydney, you would have got this as a complete omnibus, one 90-minute episode on a Saturday afternoon, and you would have got it in March of 1988.
Yeah, I was scratching my head there, Dave, as you were talking, because I was thinking, I remember the omnibus stuff, but I don't remember them being in 2 parts. I remember it just being in like 1 part. So did we get a different sort of omnibus here in Sydney to you?
You did. You got everything in omnibus. We got most things in double episodes.
Right, okay, yeah, because I remember taping things off screen and having like Planet of Fire as this 1 90-minute movie, as I've described it in the past, and I think that contributes to my love for it, because I think of it as a movie, being out there on location and having seen it as that kind of omnibus. But I guess we're digressing from Keeper of Traken, but that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah, it brought back some memories for me, and I've got to say I'm the opposite to you, Rob. I would have been not quite 8 when I saw this, and well and truly involved in being a Doctor Who fan by that age, and I really adored this. And the things that I adored about it then, I still adore about it now, and that is the look and the feel and the excitement of it. I think I've mentioned before that, particularly as a kid, I wanted Doctor Who to be gleaming metal and flashing lights. And Keeper of Traken gives you that. You've got the source manipulated machine and the imagery of the Keeper and the flame behind the Keeper. And all these little things that I really like. It looks great and it feels like an adventure. As I've grown up, I still love those things, but there have been other things I like that I have come to appreciate.
Yeah, I was cogitating on this earlier today, and I was thinking, at the time, I was a Star Wars kid, and Star Wars is very much, science fantasy. And I think Keeper of Traken is science fantasy writ large. The sort of society they have. They're getting around in these sort of Shakespearean costumes, and the way their society is set up and so on. And yet they're also extremely technological, well in advance of us here on Earth today. And it's that interesting juxtaposition, that gives it this fairy tale, science fantasy kind of feel that I really like now. And I just don't know why I didn't like it at the time, because I love Star Wars and I love the science fantasy feel of Star Wars.
That's interesting. I mean, there's not a lot of spaceships and robots and that sort of thing, which maybe as a kid we do look for. And even the Melker, as wonderful a design as it is, couldn't really be called a monster in the traditional Doctor Who sense. So it is lacking that. But it occurs to me, literally just as we're talking, this does kind of pull in some ways from the best of the 3 different sub-eras of Tom's era, because in the same way that the Hinchcliffe era would say, right, this week we're doing Frankenstein, and this week we're doing Sherlock Holmes in London, and this week we're doing King Kong. This week, the Keeper of Traken is doing Shakespeare, it's doing The Tempest, it's doing Macbeth. And it also takes that literary sort of influences that the Williams era really has and puts them in. And it is a very literarily aware episode. But it's also got the Christopher H. Bidmead, let's have real science in there, or at least real scientific terms and concepts in there. And it kind of blends them all together in a real wonderful sort of best of the Tom Baker era vibe, I think.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And look, you mentioned the Melker there. Can we, I guess we can just dive in and talk about anything. So can we talk about the Melker and what it is? Because I think I was confused by this as a child, and when I was rewatching it again this week, I was having to still put it together in my head. The Master and his TARDIS is inside the Melker, yes?
I'm not sure.
You're not well, see, here we go. You're not sure. To me, the TARDIS is inside the Melker, and the Melker is some kind of machine that is almost TARDIS-like, because obviously the Master's in it, there's a control room and such, and his viewport is even like the Melker's eyes, so I don't know whether the Master's shrunk down inside it to be looking out of the eyes like that, or whether it's just, just the way it's set up. And I took it to be that the Melkers arrived there, and maybe the Master has stayed inside in his TARDIS, inside the Melker, while he not regenerates, but sort of recovers a bit from when we last saw him in Deadly Assassin, which is why he's maybe a little more human-looking in this episode than the cadaverous version in Deadly Assassin. Am I making any sense? Is this how you've thought of it, Dave, or have I got headcanon going on?
Some of it I agree with you, and some of it is a completely new concept to me, which is interesting. I do think that the idea of him being more human-looking is a real genuine story-based one. At the end of Deadly Assassin, the Doctor very clearly says that there was lots of energy coming out of the Eye of Harmony, and the Master was wearing the sash, would have absorbed it. So I think that he has renewed himself in that sense. I thought there were 2 possibilities about what the Master's doing here. One is that his TARDIS is disguised as the Melker, and 20-odd years ago he arrived at Traken and just sat there and waited for his plan to come to fruition and the moment for the Keeper to die. Which works, but given the Master would know when the Keeper was going to die, because it's all history to a Time Lord, why didn't he not just come out 6 months before, or 3 days before?
Yeah.
And part of that's because he wants to ingratiate himself with and manipulate Cassia, but 20 years seems a long time. The other option is that the Melker is just one of these evil entities that gets captured in the orbit of, or the influence of Traken, and it comes down and it becomes a statue in the grove, and it's implied that happens a lot. There are lots of milkers on across the Traken Union that are just evil entities that get trapped there.
And do we take that to be... Sorry to interrupt. Do we take that to be a name? They don't all look like the Melker. They could look like a lot of different things. It's just evil things that are being pulled in and calcified like that?
I think so.
Yeah.
And at some point in that 20 years, the Master has replaced this actual Melker with his TARDIS disguised as the Melker. So maybe he wasn't there for 20 years. He did just sort of come along 6 months earlier and prepared his plan. But, I mean, this is all clearly because the Master wasn't in the original concept. And, in fact, up to the point where Johnny Byrne, the writer, submitted his scripts, the Master wasn't in it. The Master was inserted at J&T's request by Christopher Bidmead as the script editor once Johnny Byrne had gone on holiday. So I don't think the concept really quite works that way. The Master has been inserted into an existing story.
Okay, so this might explain why inside the Melker it's more of a traditional sort of control panel. It doesn't look like a TARDIS at all, which is why I was thinking it might have been a separate thing to the Master's TARDIS, because clearly the Master is using that control panel, but it's not in his TARDIS, I don't think.
I always assumed it was, but now I'm doubting that.
Yeah, because it just doesn't seem like it. It's more of a traditional control panel with, like, you know, as I say, you're looking out the eyes of the Melker.
That's true. That is true. But it does dematerialise and rematerialise like a TARDIS would, and with the sound effect.
Yes, although when it lands on the planet, it doesn't land like a TARDIS, Dave.
No, which I guess either implies that my second theory is correct, or simply that the production team is just fudging it, because if it did arrive like a TARDIS, that would kind of give away the ending.
That is true. So let's go with fudge.
Let's go with fudge. I wanted to make a big point early in this discussion, Rob, and that is, as I look at this story, it is in many ways, structurally particularly, a very unusual Doctor Who story, particularly for the classic era.
Tell me more.
Let me give you a couple of dot points. It is a very rare occasion in Doctor Who where we get, at least in part one, a non-linear narrative. Mm-hmm. We get story told in flashback, which I struggle to think of another occasion in Doctor Who where that happens in the classic era.
Yeah, and for people who haven't seen the episode, but you're still listening to us talk about it, you've got the Doctor and Adric on the TARDIS watching scenes that the Keeper has appeared inside the TARDIS and is showing them scenes on the TARDIS viewfinder.
Yes, this is what happened last month, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then eventually the two plots catch up to each other. It's a story that ends on an overt downbeat cliffhanger.
Well, yeah, you think it's going to end pretty well until the final moments.
Yeah, it gives you a whole lot, so you get that traditional end of part 4, or however many episodes there are, but end of part 4 scene of everybody's happy and the Doctor and his companion have headed off into the next adventure, and they get a bit of a tag scene in the TARDIS. You think, oh, okay, well, that's a traditional ending. Then it cuts back to Traken, and suddenly the Master's TARDIS is there, and suddenly the Master's there, and suddenly Tremas is killed or taken over, and then Nyssa comes down, Father, where are you? Cut to credits.
Yeah.
That's a very unusual thing for a Doctor Who story to end like that and overtly set up the next story.
It's unusual, it's bleak, and something I read about this recently, Dave, when you think about it, the Doctor... I can't think of any other time where the Doctor has saved the day on a planet and left, and in the very next story that planet has been destroyed. But that's what happens with Traken. Yeah,
well, not just the planet, the whole Traken Union, all the planets.
Yeah.
The whole of Matilla Orionsis is destroyed, so that is unique as well. The Keeper bringing the Doctor to Gallifrey. Although we've had the Doctor summoned a couple of times, by the Time Lords or by an emergency beacon or something like that, the idea of somebody just popping into the TARDIS and saying, hey, Doctor, come and help me out, and the Doctor going, okay, we're off to Traken then. That's an unusual way to start a story.
It is. I mean, it suggests a godlike sort of power, although it does happen in Greatest Show in the Galaxy as well, where it clearly wasn't a godlike power that could invade the TARDIS. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other for me there.
Well, it's unique enough of a power for the Doctor to go, the fact you did this and you're sitting in a chair suggests you must be the Keeper of Traken.
Yes. Also, just thinking of those early scenes, Dave, where the Doctor pulls out those old books and he's got himself and Adric reading them to read up, I think, on information on Traken, if I recall what I watched just earlier this week. God, my memory's terrible. Do you think the Hartnell Doctor wrote those journals?
It's a very Hartnell type thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, like as an explorer in the universe, might have started those journals and wrote things down in a very dry sort of way.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
And the final unusual point I want to make is that this is the Doctor and a male companion, and that's it.
Yeah, and don't they work well together?
They work so well together. This, possibly Logopoulos, but if not Logopoulos, I think this is Matthew Waterhouse's best story in the role. And the relationship he has with Tom Baker, and the relationship those two characters have, is so wonderful. And this is to me what I think of when I think of Adric. And this is where the character of Adric really works. Matthew Waterhouse has given material he's very comfortable with and very able to do. He clearly works well acting alongside Tom Baker. He then works very well both as a character and as an actor working alongside Sarah Sutton as Nissa.
Or Nisa, as he calls her at one stage.
That's right. But yeah, look, I think this is a really good story for Adric, and it's a real shame. This is one of those combinations like the Fifth Doctor and Perry that I think I just wish we could have had just a few more stories of this.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we got a few more stories, maybe the magic would have worn off. Maybe the magic's there because it is just this one outing and it worked, reasonably well. Because I do agree with you completely, Dave, that the way these two get on is great. In fact, at times, because we know what was happening off screen, that Tom was a cranky old bugger and he didn't particularly like Matthew Waterhouse and such, I kept watching this and sort of cringing, thinking, we're going to have a scene where he's not going to be looking at Matthew properly, or they're not going to bounce off each other very well. But no, all their interactions in this are really fantastic. Adric is not annoying at all. He does go well with Sarah Sutton. Although I do say if we had more of it, could the magic have worn off? I don't know. Look,
maybe. The other thing that, of course, is important is, for the first time since Adric joined the TARDIS crew, Lalla Ward is not there.
That's true too.
Now, I'm a big fan of Lalla Ward and Romana, the character, but we all know a lot of the tensions around Tom in that year were to do with his turbulent relationship with Lalla Ward. Mm-hmm. That I think Matthew Waterhouse, he's written in his autobiography, Blue Box Boy, a very good book. He's written in there that sometimes he was just this guy on the set, just stuck between Tom Baker and Lalla Ward, having a massive lovers' quarrel. And what do? You're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old actor, and you two more senior regular cast are having relationship problems in front of you, bringing it onto the set. And we know Tom brought this onto the set.
Yeah.
And now that's been removed, and I think maybe that does allow Matthew Waterhouse as well to relax a bit, and Tom to relax a bit as well. And Waterhouse does talk about that in his autobiography, just what it was like to work with Tom in that year.
Yeah, big thumbs up for Tom and Matthew in this episode.
Yeah, I've spoken in praise of Matthew, but I need to mention Tom as well. This to me is, I hesitate to say it because there's so many good Toms, but I think this is my favourite Tom. I really like him in this season. I think the slightly older look works very well for him. The increased world weariness works really well for him, but he's still got that spark. He's still got that wonderful love of life. And that scene you mentioned earlier, Rob, where they're going through the journals and talking about the Doctor's prose style and all that sort of thing, that's a lovely scene. And Tom's really tender and funny in that. And he gets other moments like that as well. But at the other end of the scale, the moment he has in part 3, I think it is, maybe part 4, where he's asking Tremas for the plans to the source manipulator, and Tremas is like, I can't give you that. I swore an oath that I would never hand those over. And the way Tom plays that, he doesn't get angry, or he doesn't get loud and blustery. Just, well, that's fine. That's fine. Melkor will take over Traken. Thousands will die. The Empire will be in ruins. But that's okay, because you'll have kept your honour intact. Yes. He plays it so well.
He does.
And his craziness from the previous season has been reined in, and I love the costume as well. So, as I say, there's a lot of good Tom. There's a lot of enjoyable Tom across the 7 years, but I think this is my favourite version of Tom.
That's interesting, because he doesn't look 100% well. The hair has straightened out in a lot of areas. He turns sideways at different times. I think, my God, he is so thin. Like, he doesn't look like the bigger, bulkier sort of man that I think of from earlier seasons. And I think he had some health issues around State of Decay, for example.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, State of Decay was the story where he had to have his hair curled because it was so flat.
Yeah, and even here, his hair's a bit off. He looks really thin. The costume, I don't mind it. I'd love to get rid of the question marks on the collar. That's still one of my bugbears of it.
True.
But, as an ensemble, it's pretty good. I like the long boots. I like the coat. I think it does suit him. It's not a bad costume by any means. Is it my favourite Tom Baker? I couldn't go that far, Dave, but it's interesting and it's mature, and I like those aspects of it.
Shall I give you something that I don't like about the story?
Yeah, please.
I think the music is horrible.
Oh, I'm so glad you said this, because aside from the really well-known and popular little Traken theme that you hear towards the start of the story when we first see the court, you probably know the piece of music I mean.
I think it's the Traken wedding theme or something it's called.
Yeah, something like that, and it's really memorable. It's a great little piece of music. The rest of it is just like a cat's walked along the synthesizer, and it's slightly too loud. It's just bloody awful.
When we did a episode where we talked about Doctor Who music, probably a couple of years ago now, I remember making the point that I like a lot of the music in season 18. I think when the Radiophonic Workshop is given the task of writing the script, is given the task of writing the scores, they come up with some really wonderful and memorable scores. But I made the point at the time, I think it's disappointing that every story gets electronic music because some just aren't suited to it. And I think the Keeper of Traken is one of them. I think that a traditional Dudley Simpson string quartet with a couple of, bassoons or something in addition, or, a couple of French horns and a whole bunch of violins, that sort of a feel, or maybe a harpsichord or something. Real instruments that evoke that sort of Renaissance court feeling would have been really, really appropriate here. And even that wedding score, I remember it being on a cassette that I had of Doctor Who music from, I think, the 20th anniversary or something. Even that, I think, doesn't quite work because it's so clearly a synthesizer of some sort. Had that been an actual string quartet, I think that would have been a much nicer thing. I think they missed a trick by not having, in inverted commas, real music or real instruments.
Yeah, that wedding score would have sounded better, that's for sure. But as a little piece of music, I think it's quite competent as music, like music notation on the page. I think it's very good. But yeah, I totally agree with the music. At times it's just overwhelming, overpowering, and just awful to listen to.
What do you make of Traken itself?
I love it. I was about to bring this up. I was about to say, wouldn't it be great if we could go back to Traken? And I guess we can. We can go back to it in the past. I just love this fairy tale feel to it. This little grove that they go out to. The guys protecting the grove. They're sort of part, groundskeepers, part security guards, I guess.
Yes.
This society that dresses and acts in a certain way but is highly technological, as I mentioned earlier. I love how all of this comes together. I find Traken quite an interesting sort of place, and it's funny, I was reading goth opera recently, and in that you sort of get a bit of an insight into Nissa's scientific understanding and knowledge and things she learned on Traken and stuff, and it got me thinking about Traken in general. I think it's a really well constructed, for what we have in front of us, 4 25-minute episodes of a children's television show. It's a well constructed world compared to what we get in many episodes, and I really appreciate that kind of thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. This is, I think, one of the things that really makes this a strong story, and that is that it is a world, or a series of worlds, in fact, that you suddenly understand. You get that they're a very aristocratic sort of society. You get they've held on to a lot of these Renaissance sort of vibes while still being highly technological. You understand who the consuls are. You understand who the Fosters are. Interestingly, this wasn't how Johnny Byrne originally imagined the society to be. He actually imagined it being something on that old, awful sci-fi cliche of having the scientist people and the religious sort of people, a la Meglos. And fortunately, because Meglos had already done that, they said, no, don't do that. But that was sort of where he was originally coming from. A point, though, that I noticed is that there is a little bit of a dark tinge to this society, and I don't know whether it's deliberate or it's just the way that in a lot of sci-fi, when a world seems perfect and a utopia, it often proves not to be. And it occurred to me that this is actually a very undemocratic sort of society, in that the way I think it works is the Keeper appoints his consuls, and then at the end he appoints his successor. So there's no democracy on this planet or in this union. It's really just sort of a benevolent dictatorship, and there are moments such as the bit where Sauron enters rapport with the Keeper, where the Keeper is really quite almost scary in the way that he reacts to Sauron, and kind of just allows him to be killed, almost as a punishment.
Yeah, no, look, there's a couple of things to unpack there. You're quite right, and although it does make me giggle, when Cassia gets appointed by the other two consuls, is that legal? Because shouldn't they have a full quorum of consuls to be appointing her?
It is a very unusual thing where the Keeper said, okay, I'm appointing Tremas, and they've said, well, we're just going to lock Tremas up and appoint somebody else. And two people get to pick who the next Keeper for the next 1,000 years is going to be, and it's the person who just locked up her political rival.
And I know I say that in fun, but yeah, you got to think about it. Think, is that really fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Cassia and Tremas, I think that Sheila Ruskin's performance as Cassia is excellent. I think that Anthony Ainley's performance as Tremas is excellent. I never buy them as a couple.
Oh, no.
Cassia has some wonderful lines about how much she loves her husband, and Tremas has some wonderful lines about how much he loves his wife, but you never see it. You never buy that. I just never buy it at all. And I think that's a big flaw.
Do you think it's the age of them as well?
Yeah, maybe. And this is another point that I wanted to discuss with you, Rob. The timeline for this. Is it that they had Tremas and Cassia's wedding? The Keeper comes along at the reception and blesses them, sees what's going on and senses something's not up, and sort of ducks out of the reception straight to the TARDIS, and the TARDIS arrives pretty much the morning after the wedding? Or is it that a few months have flowed and they've settled down into sort of routine domesticity, and the Doctor arrives a little bit afterwards? How quick do you think the Doctor's arrival is after that wedding?
Gosh, that's hard to say. I mean, just watching it on screen, you sort of get swept up that it's all happening pretty much the morning after. But it could, in theory, be a long time after, as you know, weeks maybe.
Yeah, I'd always assumed it was, but on viewing this time, I thought, actually, no, maybe it really is, a day or two after the wedding. In which case, again, neither of them act like a newly married couple, I think, would act. No, and it's interesting because, as you say, they both give good performances in general. Yeah, great performances.
They're doing great stuff, but you just don't buy them as a couple. For me, it's the age thing. How long has she been tending to the Melker and putting flowers at its feet? Is it 5 years, 10 years, something like that?
Yeah.
Since she was a young girl, whereas he's already an old guy.
Well, he's old enough to have a 18-ish year old daughter.
Yeah. And even then, it looks like he might have had her later in life.
Yeah.
For me, it's the age thing that I don't buy. I just don't. And I mean, I know in society there are younger girls who go out with older guys, and maybe it's for power, maybe it's for money, maybe for both.
Sometimes it's for love.
Sometimes it's for love, but not often, Dave.
Well, right, I'm not going to judge other people's relationships, Rob. You can have that one. Okay, well, those people who are romantics write to Rob, not me.
Yeah, and I think, okay, it does happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. Agree. I don't buy it.
Let's mention Geoffrey Beevers.
Yeah, we haven't really. I mean, we've mentioned the Master and such. We haven't got to Beevers himself. Beevers or Pratt? Dave, I think that's the question on my lips.
Gee. I think that Beevers is a more interesting voice actor. I think that Pratt was a more exciting master in that he just looked that much worse, and in that he looked scarier, and there was a much greater sense of desperation from him.
Mm-hmm.
But Beaver's voice in this is remarkably good, and I think that does carry a lot of the story and carry a lot of his performance. I've actually seen and met Geoffrey Beevers. He was at the convention where I met Terrence Dix. That's that same convention, and so I met him there and saw him do some Q&A. But I actually saw him in a play on Broadway called The Audience, where he played the equerry to Helen Mirren's Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, that would have been very good.
So that was very good. So I have seen Beevers perform on Broadway, so that's a little side note there. I think he gives a remarkably good performance here, and carries the whole thing. I mean, you need to believe that Cassia can be manipulated by the Melka, and his performance lets you believe that.
And what is telling of his performance too, the first couple of episodes at least, he's just a bit of a voice and a hand. You don't even see him.
Yeah, he's a voice, then he's a voice and a hand, and then he's sort of a voice and a silhouette. Then you see the whole thing, and then the Doctor meets him.
Exactly. And when they meet, I guess there would be people in the audience who hadn't seen a Master story before. They might not have even seen Deadly Assassin a few years earlier. But when they meet, you know that these two guys have a history. And
yes,
you know, they could really go at it, even if you haven't seen all the Pertwee and Delgado stories.
And Tom makes the really correct, I think, acting decision there to really underplay. And that adds a sense of real gravitas to what Beavers is doing. Because Beavers gets to be the bigger bad guy, and I'm going to do these evil things to you. And Tom's very still and very quiet. And that, I think, really emphasises the balance between them. And it's a very good performance from both.
I do agree. So, yeah, look, Geoffrey Beevers, thumbs up from me.
Generally speaking, I want to praise the visual look of this story.
Yes.
Like the whole of Season 18. Season 18 looks amazing. John Nathan Turner has come in as the acting producer with Barry Letts as the executive producer, and they just make the budget work. They find designers and directors and crew that want to make this work, and the sets look gorgeous. The Grove is lovely. I think it works. Would it work better if they'd had a bit of location filming and it was an actual grove? Maybe, but maybe that wouldn't have been within the tone of the story. I don't know. The costumes are lovely. The props, like the look of the Source manipulator, that's a wonderful, evocative thing. Something as simple as the flame behind the Keeper's chair. That entranced me as a kid. As a kid, I instantly knew what it meant and how it worked, and that as the flame went down, the Keeper was weaker. And then the moment where the Keeper's death is portrayed so simply just by that flame going out, but so effectively. Yeah. I think there's a lot to really praise in the way that this was put together.
Yeah, and something I picked up on too, we often talk about in the 80s stories, the lighting being way too bright. Here, out in the Grove, the scenes are noticeably darker than when they cut to inside. There is a definite difference in lighting, and they've darkened those scenes in the Grove. It looks wonderful.
Yeah, and even the difference between, for example, the courtroom and the control room, and then the passages underneath, or the cellars and the like underneath. There is a real differentiation of lighting there, and then they really drop it, of course, for the death of the Keeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to praise that as well.
We need to mention, or at least I want to mention, the episode 3 cliffhanger, which is horrible. The moment where Cassia assumes the Keepership, having effectively sacrificed herself so her husband doesn't have to, which, look, even though I don't buy the relationship, I understand the plot point, and I get that, and I get her motivation, and her performance is wonderful. And then she has a TARDIS basically land inside her.
Yes.
That's a horrible death. And it's really so effectively done. She screams and writhes, and there's that effect, and then it cuts to the credits, and that's such a good cliffhanger.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. That is a good one.
Any weak performances you had here?
You know what? I really don't think there is. I have a soft spot for this story, I confess. I love the fairy tale feel to it. Maybe that papers over a few cracks here and there. On the whole, There's no sort of actor who stands out. Think, oh God, that's that guy who's terrible every time I watch this, or woman. No, I don't get that.
Yeah, look, my weak one is Ronald Oliver as Neiman. Not that I think he's doing a bad performance. I just don't think he's quite hit the same tone as the other characters. You look at the way that Margot Vanderberg is playing Couture, and she's wonderful and Shakespearean, and John Woodnut is playing Seren, and he's doing all the, gathered our hugger-mugger around, and, he's doing Shakespeare, and Robin Soanes, who's still acting today, he's in Victoria, actually, with Jenna Coleman.
Huh.
He's a recurring character in that. He plays Luvic, and he's a wonderful, lovely character. I don't understand what's going on. I love that. I think there's some really good ones in there. One of the things that I think is good, everybody talks about the Shakespearean influence of this, and there are clear Shakespearean influences. We spoke about The Tempest. We've mentioned Macbeth, even to some extent some of the Henry plays. But of course, there is a lot of Julius Caesar in this as well. Right down to the fact that Cassia is obviously analogous to Cassius in the Julius Caesar play. And I think the real moment that I think is quite a lovely little homage is that there's almost a direct lift out of Shakespeare. I'll read you a couple of lines from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and then we'll mention the line that's referenced. But in ourselves that we are underlings, Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is as fair a name, which we get as named. Cassius is as good a name as Tremas. It's a real, as close to a direct lift as I think you're going to get, and I think that shows the pedigree and the fun and the performances of this story, which I think is an overlooked gem in Doctor Who's pantheon.
Yeah, that is very much a shorthand version of the Shakespeare, and agree with your assessment there.
So that's our thoughts on the Keeper of Traken, but we asked for listener thoughts, and we have got some, Rob. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we do. Our mate over in the UK, Matt Barber, who tweets at Matt Barber UK, he does Filmark reviews there on Twitter. He says of Keeper of Traken, it's great. Terrified me as a kid, entranced me as an adult. Theatrical and thoughtful in the best sense.
Oh, lovely. Local friend of the podcast, Rob Kelly, who tweets at Rob Kelly Tweets. He says, haven't seen this one for a while, but the last time I put it in the DVD player, I really enjoyed it. And there's a little love heart there. It's one of those stories that has translated well into my adulthood. As a teenager, I thought it was dull and didn't rank it. Doctor Who, can't wait to hear the show.
Well, there you go. You've heard
There you go. I think he agrees more with you there, Rob, that he came to appreciate it more as he got older.
Yeah, and I've been like that. As I said, I've done that with other episodes I really love. Kinder, I just didn't rate as a young'un, and now I think Kinder is the second best Davo.
Yep, I can understand that.
And finally, at DC Signal, who is Darren Signal, who often writes into us, Dave, says, I knew Tom was regenerating soon, and because of the delays we were getting with TV and Z, I thought this could be his last story. I watched with trepidation, expecting the worst with every cliffhanger. But fantastic, he survived, and we got another serial. Yeah,
look, that's great. And isn't it wonderful that we've had 3 tweets from 3 different countries?
Yeah, that is very nice. And thank you so much for telling us your thoughts on the show. I know I put that tweet out rather late in the day when it comes to recording this episode, so I was lucky to get those.
But if you have your thoughts, please do write in and tell us, or tweet us. We'll be delighted to hear that. And also whether you've enjoyed the concept of a deep dive into a single story, something we haven't done. Do you want us to do more of it? Are there stories you think are forgotten and would like us to chat about? We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, absolutely, because I particularly enjoyed doing this, just concentrating on the one episode, or one story, I should say.
I wouldn't want to do it too often, but yeah, I think it could be a nice one to have in the bag, so to speak.